Right.
That's it. Thank you.
Right, here we go. So this is a postcard of the way it was when it was built at the center of the buildings. The wards, what you can see if you look to the right, you can see the corridor, which is going off to two of the ward blocks. And the corridor will go on through the buildings you see and out to the other two ward blocks on the other side. And this is what there is in the middle. They are, reading from left to right, and I hope I get this right, the house for the medical superintendent, the guy who was going to be running the West Ham Infirmary. And I think that it's not just a house. I think that the ground floor may have been taken up with the admissions ward. And then you've got the entrance hall with a big entrance door that you can see in the middle. And above that is the chapel. And then to the right, you've got the housemen, the junior doctors. They have rooms and they have a communal dining room and a communal lounge. And I suspect that the other admissions ward for the other sex of patients, and don't ask me which way round they were, is in the ground floor of that. And those ground floors communicate with the two ends of the entrance hall. Behind, there are a couple of water towers. I think they're water towers. And on the right-hand one, you may be able to see, sticking forwards, the clock. Now, all that's the one I was showing you. And then this is as near as you can get at the moment as a member of the public. And you will see that you can still see the tops of the houses. That's the medical superintendent's house left. You can see a water tower. You can see the roof and the top of the windows of the chapel, the other water tower with the clock on it, and the roof of the medical officers, the houseman's quarters. And if you look there, you can see at the right side above the A&E department, there's the rest of the medical superintendent's house. Now, some of these are photos that David Boot took. This is a photo showing the two water towers close up and the roof of the roofs of these things. And I also have been provided with photos from Historic England, who got into some enclosed spaces. So here is the front of the medical superintendent's house as close up from a space that's actually inside the A&E department. And this is from Mike Fox, and it's the old front. You can see, if you look at the left end of the porter cabin, you can see the steps up and where the old front door was. And there's a couple of windows of the old entrance hall, and above those are the windows of the chapel. And this is Historic England, and it's a better view of the same, complete with some very fine things in the roof of the chapel, which match the things on the roof of the water tower. And over at the right end of the roof of the chapel, you can see that the clock is still there. And that's another, showing that they've messed up the old front door. This is the side of the medical officer's house, the housemaid's quarters. And now we're going indoors. This is a photo David Boot kindly gave me from a while ago when the chapel was fitted out as a chapel, complete with altar, and you may notice a cross in the corner of the room. And this is how it is now. I've not seen it myself, but altars disappeared, stained glass is still there, and they put in a Christmas tree, which may date it. And this is the same view but done with the lighting different so that you can see what the stained glass is. And the patch at top right, I think, is where something's gone through a bit of the stained glass and Bart's help haven't repaired it. And then this is a side view of the chapel as it now is. English Heritage visited at the end of last year, hence the Christmas tree. And this, I think, is part of the explanation of why the altar and such have been removed. The west end is screened off and it is in use for Muslim prayers. But you will also see, and we're getting some more photos in a moment, the rather fine ceiling or roof, whatever you call it, which is done as a hammer beam roof, and the metal ties are ornamented. Sorry, I've gone on too fast. So I'm coming back. Oh. Yeah, that's a view of the roof. And I haven't got a pointer, but you can see the way in which the woodwork comes out, and then there's a thing on top of the projecting beam, and then it comes out again, and there's a thing on top of the projecting beam. So that is a double hammer beam roof, though I suspect that it's more ornamental than structural. But it is a quite elaborate effort that they made in 1902 or 1903. And I suspect that the metal ties, because of the ornament on them, are original and may originally have been intended to carry the lighting. So that's the same, rather better lit. And that's a David Booth photograph from some time ago. And that's a view of the door as it was. And you can see there's these neat stone things that your hammer beam structure is carried on. And then this is the staircase that goes up from the main corridor to the chapel, in which there are a couple of 1950s little bits of stained glass. The one on the left is this one, showing a nurse borrowing a book from the patient's library. And I think the cupboard behind the lady with the red jersey on, who's helping her with the book, there's what looks to me like a cupboard of medicines. And above her head, there is a very typical 1950s lamp, which doesn't go too well with the scroll work at the top and bottom of the panel, but that's what happens. And there, the nurse is talking to the patient along with the visitor. And you may observe left of the nurse's head, there is a drip thing. And above the nurse's above the nurse's head, there is another very fine specimen of 1950s lamp. Right, this is the hospital shop. And the reason why I'm showing it to you is it's what they've done with the former entrance hall. But we think that lurking somewhere behind some of this plastic, there is the fireplace from Forest House, which got demolished in the 1960s, and the fireplace got moved from some point, perhaps earlier, got moved from Forest House into the entrance hall. And this is one of David Booth's photographs of that fireplace, which Historic England agree is a fine specimen. And this is another photograph of the same fireplace at the point when somebody had put what looks to me like a 1980s chair in front of it. So it was still there, when people were making 1980s chairs. Now, this is the main corridor, and I'm showing it to you for two reasons. One of them is because there's a view of part of a ward block through the windows, but the other is because this is the original 1902 or 1903 floor material, terrazzo. And this is the entrance to the boardroom. I didn't have a convenient aerial photograph of the boardroom, but we suspect that the original paneling is still in the boardroom. And here we have a close-up of some 1902, 1903 flooring. Now, this one I owe to David Boot, and it's an aerial view from 1926. And it's before the 1930 extension was built. So you'll see that there's the two rectangular ward blocks, and there's the thing with the two towers in the middle between the two ward blocks. But right of the right-hand ward block, the one that's upper in the photo, there isn't yet the 1930s building. And south of the middle bit, the bit with the two water towers, you can see a laundry range complete with a tall chimney, because the hospital was built to be basically self-sufficient. And this, which I'm afraid is very fuzzy, is a close-up that I did from that aerial view, cropping it and blowing it up. And the reason why I'm showing it to you is what you're looking at right of the two towers is the back of the central block, which was, to put it crudely and not as it was put when they built it, the servants' quarters. It was where the nurses lived before the nurses' home. It had the nurses' dining hall. It had rooms for the matrons and whatever. The boiler room was underneath. This was fundamentally the servants' quarters for the hospital. Now, what you now get a view, well, that's the back view of the two towers. And that's a better back view from David Boot of one of the towers. But what I invite you to notice, this is what you get if you look up an alleyway, and this is a close-up. You'll see that there's two very different sorts of brickwork. And at top left, the back of the tower and the two windows right of the bottom of the back of the tower is original. And the rest of that is modern and quite different in color. And it's where they've cut off the servants' quarters and demolished them. Now, coming back to the aerial view, this is another blow up from the aerial view, and it shows a ward block. And I'm going to invite you to look quite closely at the way the ward block is there. If you look at the bottom right of that photo, you can see the front towards what would now be Hospital Road. And you can see that it's all open. What you've got is a stack of balconies, narrow balconies, and then a stack of wide balconies, and then a stack of narrow balconies, and then there's open walkways going between the two ward blocks. And the other thing I'd invite you to notice is you never see these days, except in aerial photos, but there are in fact 3 sets of walkways between the pair of ward blocks. There's one at the left-hand end, there's one at the right-hand end, but there's also one in the middle over the central corridor. Now, these walkways are built as fire escapes. The wards are built separately to reduce the risk of cross-infection and to increase the possibilities of ventilation. And they were built basically on the principle that the windows would be kept open and people would be kept as warm as they could be by fires. And what's happened gradually over the years is that the windows have been closed and the thing is provided with central heating. And The other thing that's happened is that a lot of what were open balconies have been filled in. If you look at this, you'll see that you've still got the open walkways, but the balconies that were at the end of the wards have been filled in almost completely. And that's what produces these odd white effects. It's what's happened because, very properly, they've left it obvious what's the infill. Now, the way it was on the plans, my understanding is that where you see the cupolas, underneath the cupolas were the toilets. And those towers with the cupolas on top are in fact sanitary stacks. And what there must be is a balcony outside the toilet. I mean, I think one stack on the end of each, on the end of the ward, there are two stacks. One stack's going to be male and one stack's going to be female. And one characteristic is that you have to go out onto the balcony and through into the small balcony in order to get to the toilet. It's not a way of keeping warm. This, I think, it's a photo from David Boot, but I think it's not very recent, and it shows still with these open things in front of the toilets. And I think you can see that the shape of the cupola is that it's deeper than it's wide, so that it covers a balcony in front and a small room, which is the proverbial little room behind. And this is one where they're still using some of the balconies for the purpose intended, but they've started filling in. This is how the side of the ward blocks was. Don't ask me, at one stage I knew, but basically what you've got is small things in the middle where there's access from the central corridor, and then the big long wards are going out on the two sides. This is what's left of the laundry range, where if you look at it, you can see the big chimney. Left of the big chimney, it's pretty derelict. Well, this is in the past. I think it's now all been demolished. But right of the big chimney, part of it was in use as electrical switch room, and therefore was finished up, you know, with modern stuff. But right of that modern grey probably gives you the best impression of how it was in terms of brickwork and where the windows were. Once again, the hospital was built to be self-sufficient. I mean, it also had not just a mortuary, but stables. Don't ask me what the stables looked like. I think they disappeared before anybody took photographs. But it did its own laundry, and you certainly didn't have plastic disposable face masks or whatever. If you had face masks or whatever, they were linen, and there's a room in the laundry where it's all boiled before you do anything else to it. This is a ground floor level build view. Again, you can see the middle part just starting just right of the chimney has been in use relatively recently and has been boarded up and made weathertight. And then left and right of that, you've still got windows, but it's pretty derelict. And that's another view which gives you a slightly better view right of the part that's been boarded up of what it may have looked like. And then these are from Bart's Health, but that is the best interior we've got. It's not, as it were, quite apart from the fact that it's in pretty rotten repair, it's not an immensely attractive building inside anyway. But you can see how the windows are done with what's called a clear story effect. And this is another interior view which shows you how derelict it was before they were able to demolish it. And finally, there's a couple of plaques. This is the plaque from when it was in use as a war hospital in 1917. And this is the plaque commemorating after the war, it stopped belonging to an infirmary, it stopped belonging to the workhouse union, stopped being a workhouse infirmary, became a hospital. And because the workhouse institution was the West Ham Union, in which West Ham was the leading parish, when it passed out of, when workhouse unions got dissolved, it passed to West Ham Borough rather than to Leyton. And you can see it was the 1930s part was erected by the Corporation Works Department and finished after the beginning of the Second War. The Public Assistance Committee has taken over from the Workhouse Union, and the Works Committee is composed of the friends and relatives of the local builders. Sorry, I didn't say that. And just in case anyone wants to see what I mean, what you see the signpost, left of the signpost, that's what they put up in the 1930s. And it slightly less than doubled the accommodation for patients. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where I leave it. It's not very thrilling. It was just designed to show you what there was and roughly how much of it there was left as at the beginning of this year. So I now stop.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Rob.